blog lesson on gems, and to celebrate the end of October, I'm now going to do the Victober tag. What is the first piece of Victorian literature you ever read? I went to a Norwegian primary school, so most of the literature was Norwegian literature. But in the far corner of the library, you had two small shelves of English literature. So very few actually went there, and I sort of ended up because I sort of read through the entire library. But by the time I was 12, I went there, and there we found sort of a mixture of the more common and more known English literature. And the first Victorian book I ever picked up was H.G. Wells' A Time Machine. Favorite Victorian novel. Picking my favorite Victorian novel is kind of difficult because it means choosing between two sides of my personality. On one side, I love North and South, not because I think it's the best written of her work. I think Wives and Daughter is better written, but North and South is about politics and discussions and how should society be and run and gender issues, and it warms my heart reading about that. But another side that I really love, and I can't really choose between them, is the book representing the book Flatland by Edwin Abbott, which is about using math to have both political discussions in how we should run our society, but also having existential questions about what is reality and how can a girl say no to that. Favorite Victorian author. Now, considering that my favorite books are Flatland and North and South, one would assume that Abbott or Gaskell would be one of my favorite authors, and they are. But one of the things I want to point out with Elizabeth Gaskell that is very often overlooked is how versatile she actually is in her writing. Here in this book, we have a collection of some of her short stories and novelettes. And here you can really see how differently and versatile she writes. She writes comedies, she writes romance, she writes politically, she writes mysteries, and she writes horror. And that is one of the things why she is my favorite author, not just because she writes the wonderful political books that she does, but she's such versatile and good in being versatile. And I think she needs more props regarding that. Favorite Victorian couple. I'm seeing a pattern here regarding my favorite Victorian things is that I keep mentioning North and South. And yes, my favorite couple is North and South. But I also want to highlight Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell, because in Wives and Daughters, she has the absolute perfect way of writing a love triangle. It's really is amazing. I don't want to spoil anything, but she really is one of the few people I know who could write a well-written love triangle like that. Favorite Victorian villain. My favorite Victorian villain is the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland. How can you not love the symbol of people being idiots for questioning why 1 + 1 = 2? Favorite Victorian book where someone dies of consumption, otherwise known as tuberculosis. North and South. And I'm not going to explain anymore because I don't want to spoil it. Longest Victorian novel you have read. The longest Victorian novel I've read has to be Wives and Daughters, which, even though it's not finished, clocks in at 610 pages. Victorian book you think is underrated. When I'm now going to point out that this book is underrated, I'm not saying that it is unknown. I think people know about it, but what I've seen with Flatland is that a lot of people sort of think, ooh, math, don't want. And I think doing that might be a disservice both to the book itself, but also to the reader. Unfortunately, mathematics is one of the topics that is really ruined by most educational systems, because they only pick a small part of what is mathematics, which are the rules, like 1 + 1 = 2 or the multiplication tables, and you give them to people and say, here is mathematics. Sort of remember those. And of course people don't understand how complex and wonderful mathematics can be. I mean, mathematics is everything, and I'm not going to really start ranting about this because I both have a review of this book and another video where I talk about the mathematics in this book, and I'm going to link all of that down below. But I think you have to remember that mathematics isn't as difficult as school really lets out it to be, and it is more complex than people will let out to be. But if you do have small hesitations, I have a tip that you get one of the versions with his original illustrations, because if you are a visual thinker, and most of us are visual thinkers, having the illustrations do help to understand the most advanced of his what he's talking about. So here they live in a pentagon. This is a pentagon, but that's about as advanced as it gets. Favorite edition of a Victorian novel. I usually go for the cheapest editions of books when I'm going to buy them. But when I saw this wonderful edition with the original drawings of Alice in Wonderland, which is both Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, I really couldn't say no to this, even if it was more expensive than the other editions. I mean, look at that. How can you say no to that? 3 Victorian novels you want to read. When I started doing this tag, I realized that I haven't actually read that much Victorian novels, and that's one of the things I liked about doing Victober, that I got to read more Victorian novels, but there's still so much out there. So here are just 3 that I want to read soon. The first one is Tales of Mystery and the Macabre by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is what I'm going to do now this Halloween, which is why it's going to be very soon, which is again what I pointed out with her versatility. The second one is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, and now I have the audiobook, so I'm assuming that's also going to happen quite soon. And the third one is a book I've been trying to read for a long time, and I think I'm going to like it when I first get the energy to sit down and focus on it. And that's Bleak House by Charles Dickens. Because everything I've heard about it and the complexity of it does tell me that this is probably going to be one of my new favorite books. I just need the time and energy to sit down to get everything that this book entails, but I'm looking forward to reading it. Please leave your comments down below if you've read any of the books that I've talked about, if you've read Flatland and agree that it's also underrated. If you have any more tips of Victorian novels that you think I should try and read, I absolutely want to do that. And remember, it's better to be a witty fool than a foolish wit.